Hello there. Hi everybody. How you doing? That's good. Today we're going to talk about this, the 240 SS, as we're calling it now. Um, the process that went into building it, that went into creating it. Basically, what happened is, if you haven't seen the ignition video on the car, go watch it. It's great. It really captures the few months of chaos that was building that car, testing that car, and driving that car really well. Um, it was a long time though, building that car and testing it and finding all that stuff out. And it's amazing to see how quickly a couple months of your life can get lost just in editing. So basically, we're going to go into like kind of the nuts and bolts of what went into putting a V8 in a 240SX. It's a not the most complicated swap in the world of engine swaps. Like, engine swaps are complicated and difficult and time consuming, and there's all kinds of problems because you're introducing stuff to a car, to a chassis that's never been there before and that wasn't intended to be there before. So there's always headaches in that process. But doing the swap, it's easy to see why it's so popular. It's because this engine makes this car amazing. 240SX is a fun car to start out with, but that Chevy small block turns it into something else entirely. This thing makes me drive like an absolute jerk, and that's really the measurement of what makes a car good, is how much of a jerk it makes you drive like, and this is one of the best cars out there for that, because it's just so ridiculous. But nuts and bolts. So before we jumped into all this, I'll tell you what we've done to the car so far. We bought the car off Craigslist. It was in good condition, considering it's a 1993 240SX with 130,000 miles on it. Car was straight, had a very clean dash. It was stolen once. We found the thread on it's the Nissan 240SX Zilvia forums. It was stolen and put back together once, and then we got our hands on it and just went crazy on it. We did big brakes. We did Brembo GT braking system on the front. And then we did a 300ZX setup in the rear, and it's basically the entire 300ZX setup on the rear. As I spill my coffee on my hands, that wasn't too warm, thankfully. 300ZX rear brake setup with Brembo rotors on the rear. Suspension is KW Club Sports. They're nice. They're really nice shocks, really nice dampers, really nice coilovers. And then we had an ISIS / Injuku Racing, I'm not really sure what the official name is, suspension replacement kit, where it's beefier adjustable arms that went on and replaced a lot of stuff. The 5-lug hub conversion, this car was on 4-lug hubs before we did all this stuff. And then we did the 5-lug hub conversion and had to do all this stuff because you fall down the might as well train when you start installing all this stuff. That enabled us to do big Brembos. That enabled us to do the wheels that we have, and so on and so on. The wheels are Graham Lights 57DR, I want to say, and the tires are BF Goodrich Rivals. We got the tires and the Brembo replacement rotors on the rear from Tire Rack. They're great. Those tires, the BF Goodrich Rivals, are freaking awesome. Took the car over a G and have withstood multiple test days, tons of drifting and abuse, and some pretty extreme road course use, and they still have tire on them. It's amazing how well tires that give you over a G laterally will hold up these days. It's amazing, but I'm getting beyond myself. So this shows you some of the suspension replacement stuff that went in there. This is all adjustable too, which is nice. It really helps dial things in. This is all from the last update that we did. Those are the wheels we put on. We did the over fenders not because we wanted to. We wanted to run stock bodywork, but the tires didn't clear, so we had to put on wider bodywork, and that's why those are on there. Yeah, they don't look great. They don't fit great either. We did a bad job installing them, but that's really beyond what we care about. There's Mark cutting out the rear to accommodate. Oh yeah, we have Recaro seats. I forget the name of them. I think they're pole position. They are awesome. They are really, really nice. They fit great in there. And it took a lot of work to make them fit great, but they feel good. They fit great. There's Mark, and there's my dad in the back. He was in town, and he helped us work on the car a little bit back when we were doing the bodywork install. You can see how tight some of the clearances are in the front. We're on a 17x9 tire setup, or wheel setup all around. Offset's a little bit different front to rear, and the tires are 245/40 or 245/35. I think 245/40. I forget. All around. I wanted to keep a neutral tire setup, keep the tire size the same at all four corners, because that helps the car stay balanced in corners. It really helps neutrality. If you have a bigger rear tire, you end up promoting understeer in the car itself. So I didn't want to do that, and that's fixable with geometry, that understeer would be. But I like solving problems upstream. At least that's how I like to think of it. I could be totally wrong. So that's why I went with an equally sized tire setup front to rear. And with the V8, it's not bad, but it definitely is an oversteery car. But that's not a bad thing. Clearance is an issue though on the front. This is pretty much the widest you can possibly go. And you'll run into bodywork. We hammered out a lot of bodywork and had to move a lot of stuff out of the way to make those tires fit. And still have more work to do. So this is kind of where the car last sat with all that stuff, and it was really fun. Tons of grip, no power. This thing put 118 horses to the rear wheels at K&N's dyno, so no power, but a ton of grip. Didn't have to use those brakes. It's a bummer because we put on some massive brakes. Didn't have to use them at all, but it was really fun. But now we get to the actual reason why we're here. And that's the LS3 we've put into the 240. So everything for the driveline, it's basically a complete driveline swap. The reason why 240SX is nice because there's not a lot of crazy electronic vehicle integration going on. We can basically put in a closed loop, essentially GM driveline system in the front, and it doesn't have to talk to the rest of the car, which is really nice. So we went everything from Chevy, and kind of the methodology in choosing our parts was, we know that with 430 horsepower, the car is going to be really fast. We don't need to go more power than that. When you have 430 horse, that's a ton of power. That's a power to weight ratio, using 2,700, 2,800 pounds, about 6 pounds per horsepower. Let me double check that really quick. I should do the math first before I start talking about 2,800, 430. 6.5 pounds per horsepower. That's a lot. That's a lot of horsepower per pound. That's a really good ratio to have. That's like Z06 or last gen Z06 and Z06 territory before that. That's a lot of pound, or that's a good power to weight ratio in a car that doesn't have ABS and in a car that was designed essentially in 1989, if not before that. So we didn't go crazy adding more power. We kept it as OEM as possible. We didn't modify the engine, didn't modify the clutch, didn't modify the transmission, because we didn't need to. And that's kind of the logic of where this swap comes from. It's that, beyond the power, beyond the packaging, beyond the the emissions stuff that this engine comes with, it's the reliability. A lot of people ask why we didn't do turbo 2-liter, the SR20, why we didn't do the RB25, and a lot of it comes down to reliability. Those engines were built in the early 90s. They're using early 90s turbo tech. They're cool engines. Don't get me wrong. They're really cool engines, and you can do a lot with them. But I want a reliable powertrain, ultimately. And, it's just physics. A 2-liter turbo 4 running at 430 horsepower is going to be less reliable than a V8 that comes out of the store, out of the factory at 430 horsepower. That's just how it works. And it's not to disparage the SR20s. That's just the reality of the situation. They're cool engines, the SR20s, but, I like naturally aspirated V8s, and if it fits, cool. I really don't mean to disparage their engine choices, but that's why we went down this path. So, the engine itself, I can kind of read off the parts. We had an E-Rod LS3 V8. I can put part numbers in the description if you guys want to see them. The E-Rod package is really cool because it's emissions carb legal. Now you pay extra for the E-Rod designation, a couple grand extra to be street legal, but it's worth it ultimately, especially if you live in California, as I do. If you don't go E-Rod, you save a couple grand, but you can still get an LS3 E-Rod or without E-Rod. But the package that it comes with, at least the part numbers that we got, were fairly comprehensive. I mean, you get we had exhaust manifolds, the engine itself. It even had oil in the pan. It came with a ECU, wiring harness, air filter, bosses for all the sensors, O2 sensors, catalytic converters, and the MAF sensor. I mean, it's a fairly comprehensive package. There's a lot of stuff that comes with this engine. It's pretty surprising when we opened up all the stuff and dove into it and like, wow, there's a lot of stuff here. We had to get an accessory drive kit because you need power steering and you need all the accessories that go along with that. And the reason that doesn't come with the engine is because there's a lot of different options for accessory drive kit. But we got it from Chevy, and you can choose different accessory kits depending on the fitment that you want. And we went with an accessory drive kit from a CTS-V that you can actually see it's installed on here. There's the power steering pump. Alternator is going to be down here. That was it on at the time? But there's stuff that goes around, like that. We followed basically internet logic on the accessory drive kit, and we know the CTS-V kit works, so that's why we went with that. We had to get a starter motor that was separate, or alternator. No, alternator, starter different. We had to get a starter motor. Alternator came with the accessory drive package. 2 bolts, a T56 Super Magnum transmission, obviously the transmission, and a transmission install kit. And that was it for the driveline. That's all we needed to get all that stuff in there. And the trans install kit came with a bell housing, came with a clutch, came with everything, and it's basically all OE GM stuff. It's not unlike what you get in a Camaro SS, ultimately. The T56 Super Magnum is a new transmission, newish. I'm not up on the world of Chevy performance parts, like how new stuff is, but it's a sweet transmission. It's a really, really nice transmission, really close ratio 6-speed. The problem with it that I'll show you later is the fitment. We made it work and it behaves beautifully now, but there was some extra work involved in getting that done. So this is some of the stuff that came in the Chevy kit. You can see, this would be the ECU. This would be the ECU right here. These would be all the sensors. There's all kinds of stuff. There's booklets. Air filter came with it. Blah blah blah. And you have to use all this stuff. All the stuff that comes with the E-Rod kit, you have to use it to be carb legal. If you don't have to be carb legal, you can ignore a lot of this stuff, and you actually save a ton of money in install time without being carb legal. This was our swap kit that we got from Fueled. Fueled Racing does a really nice swap kit. It doesn't hurt that this swap is kind of on the easy side of engine swaps. Engine swaps still being a relatively difficult thing to do. The Fueled Racing kit was really nice. New oil pan from Moroso, engine mounts, transmission cross member, all kinds of lines, power steering lines, fuel lines, new fittings, all AN. What else? Gasket, oil filter relocation kit, drive shaft, and if you don't have to care about being carb legal, they'll also do headers that are made to fit this application. And when we get to the exhaust, we'll show you how tricky exhaust fitment can be in this car. The Fueled Racing kit is great. I'd recommend it if you're looking to do this swap. I would totally recommend Fueled Racing. It's a really nice swap. So here we are with the engine up in the air. There's Mark on the left and there's Alex on the right. Alex is from a shop called L-Spec in Redondo Beach. He gave us a hand with this swap. And basically what we have to do is this came with an oil kit. This came with an oil pan on it. The Chevy engine did, of course. That oil pan doesn't fit in the 240SX, so the Moroso pan that came with the Fueled kit fits. And the cool thing is that it fits between the front cross member and the front anti-roll bar with very tight clearance, but it fits, and that's great. But so we put that on, had to use oil pickup, and it's very important. We paid a lot of attention to this because oil starvation kills an engine. If it's done, if you install an oil pan wrong, if you install an oil pickup wrong, it's bad news. So don't do that. There's me helping push the engine into the engine bay. There's quite a few of these. We were all really excited to get that in, as you can see. Exhaust manifold, yay! There we are, 2 cool guys talking cool car guy stuff. And there's the engine going in place. What we haven't pictured is the space behind the tunnel that you have to hammer out, and that's really the biggest modification you have to make to the chassis when you're doing this swap. Is there's probably about a 2-inch, maybe 1.5 inch long space that you just have to clear out with a hammer to get the bell housing to fit. And we had an air hammer on that, and took about 10 minutes, if that. Just massage that metal out of the place, and it was fine. We had to notch the tunnel a bit to clear the shifter, but that's because we had that transmission. If you have a T56, that's been proven to fit without major modifications, like this needed, but that's what we had to do. It's funny that the engine and transmission were in place in the car on the second day of this swap, and then we were still working on the car a month later. It's the big pieces come together really quickly in this swap, but the little stuff takes forever, and there is a ton of little stuff. This is, it's a daunting project when you're in the middle of it. There were a lot of times where I was like, why did we ever do this? Because it feels like you're never going to see the end of it. There were two of us, Mark and myself. Mark's a better wrench than I am. I'm not very good at it because I haven't spent a lot of time wrenching on cars, and I'll freely admit that. I look to this as an opportunity to learn on this stuff. I love projects, I love building things, but my experience with actually wrenching on cars is fairly limited. So this is a good way to learn, right? It took the two of us basically a month of straight work. We're talking 10-hour days, 7 days a week, in a garage that we have at the office that's stocked with tools. And a lot of people around that can help. So, I mean, apply that. If you're thinking about doing this swap, just think about that. We had basically complete access to a garage that had every tool we could ever think of, and it still took us a month of straight work. And that's because we did a lot of stuff. We kind of went beyond the normal swap stuff, and we spent a lot of time working on it. But I'm proud of the result. We both are. These cardboard lists are not just things roadkill does. It's very, very, very helpful to make lists like this, because when you're dealing with a project as complex as an engine swap typically is, you'll forget things. You will forget things. You'll forget to tighten something, you'll forget to install something, and you want to double, triple, quadruple check things in order to do that. So that's why we created this list, and we were kind of throwing the 240SS name around a long time. I actually saw the 240SS name before on a forum, so I can't take credit for coming up with it, but it does fit. It sounds cool, so whatever. When you put a V8 in a 240SX, you take a lot of pictures of it because it just looks so cool. The fitment of this engine, I've talked about it before. It's amazing how well this thing fits in there. It's tight, but it fits. Our shop manager, Kalen, we were talking about it, and he's just like, you know what? This thing is an engine stand. Because it looks cool. This is my favorite one, just because you see that intake just right above the Nissan. Oh, that's so cool. Very cool. So we could start getting into this tough stuff. I just loved every morning I came in and just would look at this and just take a few minutes, drink coffee, and look at it and be like, all right, this is awesome. I was eager to come in the mornings to work on this because I'd come in and see that, and that's a really cool thing to see. As we stood around it for a long time looking at it. So here you can see underside of the car, obviously. Yeah, we saw this 240SX exhaust in place, all that rusted out nonsense. The transmission here, the oil lines going around the side of the pan, and the pan here, and you can see the front crossmember clearance here. It's tight, but it fits well. But that's how much distance you have between the front crossmember and the oil pan, and then there it is in the front. We were worried because we saw a lot of internet talk about how you basically have to run custom anti-roll bars on the front, or you have to run a custom anti-roll bar on the front because of oil pan clearance. Some other swap kits you have to do that, and they'll happily sell you anti-roll bars. But when I looked at the field kit and sort of started playing around with the front anti-roll bar from the stock one, and then realized it would fit and installed it, and I was like, holy crap, this is awesome that we can use the stock front anti-roll bar, because that's going to help a lot with handling. We're going to want a beefier one in the future, likely, but it's really cool that fits. So here we're looking at the driver's side of the engine, looking down on the oil pan here, and here's the Field Racing motor mount, not torqued or anything. These motor mounts were beautiful. It's kind of a shame they were hidden by the engine because they're really, really, really pretty motor mounts. The exhaust. When I talk about tightness, this is what I mean. It's tight. It's tight clearance on this exhaust. This is the driver's side, and it's tight because we have to use the supplied exhaust manifolds, and we have to use the supplied catalytic converters. So there's two exhaust manifolds on the LS engines. There's one that has a collector and exits at the rear, and there's one that has a collector and exits towards the center. Our engine came with rear exit collection and dump manifolds, and those ran right into the steering column. Fortunately, in the shop, we had a set of LS3 specific center collect and exit manifolds that bolted right up. So, you know, take that in mind if you plan on doing this too, that you probably have to specify which manifolds you need, and you need the center collector and exit. You can see, you know, here's power steering here, there's a motor mount there, there's the steering right there, and this is kind of the space you have to bolt up the exhaust to. If you're doing headers, like I say, you don't have to worry about this. Those just slip right through. That's probably 2.5 inch diameter right there, and it just slips on through no problem. The field kit, you know, those bolt right up. But for carb legal, it took us a ton of extra time to make this all work. And this is the it's still driver's side. That's just with better light on all the components. And you can see it's tight. There's the passenger side. Here's the frame rail. Here's the motor mount. Here are the oil lines. It was kind of a bummer is the oil lines. They're heat wrapped, yeah, but they have to go all the way past the back of the engine, right by the exhaust manifolds, and to the oil filter. So they're probably getting a lot of heat in the oil that we have to kind of keep an eye on that with the oil temp. But that's just one of the things that comes with having to put this engine in the car. We might relocate the oil filter in the future to get it out of the way of the heat, but that's for the future. Here is the back of the engine, kind of along the driver's side. You can see how tight the clearance is. I mean, it's amazing that there is an inch behind the engine, but there's clearance there, which is really cool. And there's the front. I took a ton of pictures of this. I took a ton of pictures of things that were kind of like obvious, like, hey, it's cool, the engine fits, and then not a lot of pictures of things I should have. But oh well. So when I talk about the shifter, here is where the standard 240SX shifter sits, and then here's where the Super Magnum shifter sits. So it's, you know, like an entire shifter position forward. And that's unfortunate, but it is what it is. So we had to make a solution to that. And I'm real big on ergonomics in the car. And that's why we spent so much time getting the seat to fit right, for example. And so ergonomics are really important when it comes to driving a car fast. Everything needs to fall into place, because if you're uncomfortable, you won't want to drive faster. So this was a bummer to say in the slightest. But Mark really did an amazing job making this work. I got to give him a ton of credit. He found a solution to this that was, like, I first looked at it and I was like, no way that's going to work. And then after driving the car, I was like, this is the best solution we could have done. And this is that solution. So basically what we did is took a piece of scrap metal, measured it, cut around the shifter, bolted it into the existing holes. You can see here. I'll do it with the mouse so you can actually see. Bolted it into the existing holes, and then got two pieces of metal, drilled them to fit, put some holes in them, torqued these guys down, and then put the GM supplied shifter through the back. So we've relocated the shifter back a bit, and then put the Chevy shift handle on there. So we've relocated the lever back, but the shift action feels great. I looked at this and said, that's not going to work. And then I drove it, and I was like, this is the best shifter in the world. It's covered by the 240SX dash material. I hope I have a picture of that, of how the 240SX dash fit together, because it looks amazing. It looks almost OE quality. You'd never guess this was in there. But the boot fits right over it, and the lever feels fantastic. The shifter falls right where you want it to be, right where you want your hand to be, and the feel of the transmission is terrific. It's very solid, precise clicks, you know, from neutral to gear, neutral to gear. I mean, it feels really good. It's a really satisfying transmission and a really satisfying shifter, which is very crucial. The whole goal of this car is to have fun, and if the shifter's not good, we failed. We did a good job on the shifter. The race pack stuff. This stuff is really cool. One of the problems with, you know, engine swaps is how do you get your tach, your mile an hour, your coolant, your temp, your oil pressure, your oil temp, all that stuff. How do you get all that stuff? You can use the 240SX dash. I know people have. You have to do a signal conversion between the GM tach signal and speed sensor to the dash. There has to be some electronic wizardry in there. I was like, why do that when we can get a digital dash that has a lot of stuff? One of the problems with using the 240SX dash is there's no provision for oil pressure, oil temp, all that stuff. So you have to run a bunch of, you know, gauges. I don't want a small army of auxiliary gauges, you know, lining the dash. I want to have it all centered and just have only one or two things to care about. So race pack we've been using their equipment to test cars at Motor Trend for a long time. They do all kinds of data logging. They're really popular with drag racers, tractor pullers, all that stuff. And we went to them to try out their IQ3 dash, and that's this guy right here. This is one of the systems that you have to really think about what you want to do. It's a modular system. So the neat thing about this is this dash basically takes whatever sensor you can give to it. This box right here is called the Universal Sensor Module, and you see these 4 inputs right there. Anything you hook up to it that outputs a voltage, this thing can read and supply to the dash. So anything. That in our case meant fuel level and oil pressure, because we run an auxiliary oil pressure gauge. But let's say you have suspension deflection. Let's say you have anything you can get an electronic signal from. The options there are so many options I can barely think of just one. But anything you can get a voltage signal out of, you can run to this box and it will display on the dash as you want it to. And the implications of that are great because this dash also does GPS, because that's how we're getting speed, that's how we're getting an odometer and a trip, and it logs all this stuff. So we can basically, when you're driving the car and you have the micro SD card in, it's recording everything. It's recording the car's position, the rate of speed, the throttle position, the RPM, gear position, oil pressure, oil temp, everything, every sensor that's coming to this dash, it's getting recorded. So after a day at the track, for example, I was really worried about oil pressure. I could put the SD card into the computer, boot up the race pack software, and see around a specific corner how many seconds we get at an actual G level, because this is going to show you the G levels based off the math from the GPS. You can see like, oh, I get 3 seconds at 1 G before oil pressure starts to drop, and you can use that to build a more robust oil pressure system or oil delivery system. Like it's amazing what you have at your disposal here, and I can totally see how nutty you can get with this sort of stuff by recording every possible sensor on the engine, logging it, and try to find how to get improvements. It's amazing what you get out of here. I've talked about this before, but the wiring harness that came with the E-Rod has an OBD2 port on it, or OBD port on it. This sensor plugs right into that, sends everything to the dash here, and the dash you can program to display whatever you want. So you have different pages of it too. And it's amazing. So you can have like tach, gear position, mile an hour, temp, odometer, and anything else, fuel level, let's say. That's one page. And then on the second page, you can have lap time. So because it's GPS, if you're going around a racetrack, you can actually drop a start-stop line, and it'll tell you your lap time every time you do a lap, which is really cool. And it has all that capability. This system is awesome. And then there's this bezel here that I spent like a day trimming to fit, but I'm really proud of how that came together. And here we are. So I disassembled the 240 dash and then started making this fit. Trim, fit, trim, fit, trim, fit, trim, fit, trim, fit, and then kind of this is how it ended up shaping in there. It's actually really convenient because the IQ3 just fits in the dash. It's really, really tight, but it just fits. And yes, these cuts are pretty horrific. This is not what I would, God forbid, I would never charge anybody for this work, but they're all hidden, so it doesn't matter. And this is kind of the mock-up of how it sits. So there's our auxiliary oil pressure gauge that you can see, and that's the dash right there, and that all fits, no problem. A lot of mock-up, a lot of fit, and that's why this is the kind of thing that takes so much time. It's just custom making something. You end up having to cut, or measure, cut, fit, and the trim, cut, fit, and it just takes hours, and the day goes by so fast when you do this kind of stuff. It's amazing how much time you can sink into this. And then, so when I talk about customization, danger to manifold. It's as perfect as it gets. This dash can also be controlled with 2 buttons that I actually built, that I actually used to replace right here. This coin holder I ripped out, got a piece of metal, drilled 2 holes in it, put the buttons in it, spray painted it black before I put the buttons in, and put those in. So now behind the shifter, there's two buttons you can use to change parameters on the race pack. For example, like when you're on a racetrack, you can use the buttons to drop that marker on the start-stop line, and then it'll show you. It's freaking cool. Or just the brightness, you can do it with the buttons too. It's really cool. GM Performance. That's how the back of the car looks now, which is great. So oil filter relocation kit. One of the things you have to do is this new pan doesn't have a oil filter provision on it, so you have to relocate the filter, and that's what the Fueled kit comes with. And it comes with everything you need to do that except for the filter. It recommends filters to buy, and that's what we did, and filters aren't horrifically expensive, so that's no problem. Fueled recommends putting it on the passenger frame rail, so there it is. Tightening these lines is not fun, so it's something you want to get right on the first try, because there's not a lot of space in there. You can get in there, but it's just it's not fun. Because it's an E-rod, we also had to run the Chevy supplied charcoal canister, or emissions canister, EVAP canister, which is this guy. This basically takes the fuel vapor, does some magic inside here, and then reroutes it to the intake. And that's how you have carb legality. One of the things that you need to get carb legality out of this engine. It's a big charcoal canister. It's about twice the size of the 240SX charcoal canister. And so getting it to fit was actually more difficult than it should have been. Excuse me. We were thinking here, but then that was right in the way of where the intake would end up being. So we ended up putting it underneath where you see here. This is the driver side, looking down on the driver's side of the engine bay, and it's now right in front of the driver tire, secured in there with a bracket, bolted up into the engine bay here, and it works fine. It's tight, but you know, it works. Here's the Chevy wiring harness, and this wiring harness was really cool. It may look complex and like a snake, but it could not have been easier. All the plugs were uniquely shaped. There's each tag on the plug itself will tell you exactly what it's supposed to plug into, and it's cut to length. So basically, you find out how the wiring harness wants to fall over the engine, and then you just put it on the engine and just plug. The manual that comes with the E-rod is very, very helpful because it tells you what's required and what's optional. For example, oil pressure is not required to have the engine run. The car's ECU does not care about the oil pressure sensor. So that's how we were able to get away with running our own without reprogramming anything. This is a closed box. We did not have to modify anything in here. All you have to do is make sure the engine gets power and ground, and that's kind of it. You need to ground the engine and ground the chassis, and that's pretty rudimentary electronic stuff. I don't have that knowledge, so that's where Alex and Mark really helped, is wiring that stuff up. I'm scared of electronics. Radiator came from Mishimoto. You want a big radiator in here because this engine demands a lot of cooling, even more than we have currently. Mishimoto 240SX radiator with a drop-in replacement, and there's the shroud that fits on it, and two 12-inch fans that bolt on into it. Then those get wired into the GM ECU. There's a wire that comes out from the GM that you're supposed to hook up to the fans, and the GM ECU controls the fans. Water temp goes on at like when water temp exceeds like 206, fans come on. Once it falls underneath, fans go off. It's that simple. It was just really cool. So there's Kalen, our shop manager, crazy guy. he's great. So I love this picture because one of the things about this car is that when you're far away, it looks like a piece of junk. But when you get closer and closer, you start going, whoa, whoa, whoa. I had to go to a shop at one point while we were doing a shoot to take care of a small issue, and the tech cocks out and he looks at the car and he starts looking around and he goes, there's some money in this thing. You know, like he instantly got it. You know, you see like, you know, Brembo, you see Moroso, you see Rays, you see all that stuff. You see BF Goodrich, and you start looking at the stuff and going like, oh, if you know what to look for on this car, it's a really cool car. If you don't know what you're looking for on this car, the car looks like a piece of junk, and that's exactly what we went for. So now we're talking about mocking up the exhaust, and yeah, that took some work. Mark spent a lot of time on that and did a great job considering the time constraints we were working under. We basically went way past the time we were supposed to be in the garage, and so we were rushing to get a lot of stuff done, and the exhaust is one of the things that we had to really get done quickly and just to drive it out of the shop. So there's the GM Cat. and basically what we had to do is we had to effectively drop it down. The cat should be bolted right up to the manifold, but because the diameter of the cat just wouldn't fit in there, it'd be hitting the steering rack, it'd be hitting the oil lines, all that stuff. We basically had to extend how far down the cat goes. The GM owner's manual says you can do that. It gives you a recommended range that the cat should be from the manifold, and how far the O2 sensors need to be. The O2 sensors need to be right up by the manifold, but the cat doesn't need to be. And they give you bosses to weld into the exhaust system, so they anticipate that you're going to do this. This is, you know, if you want the exhaust done, this is pretty much the most custom fab work that you need to get done. Any exhaust shop would be able to make this exhaust work, but it takes some work to do. It took a couple days, and this is what we mean by clearance. This is the drop down that Mark built, going past a bunch of stuff. And there's Mark welding away. And this is the exhaust system as it sits in the car currently. As you can see, no drive shaft in there. We were still waiting on that to get sent over. But once that arrived, that was a bolt right up, no pain, no issues deal. You can also see the oil filter here, where that ended up being, and here's the drain plug. Oil changes on this car are real easy, which is real nice. You just get in there, turn the drain plug, twist the filter out, done. And the new ones go on. It's really nice how easy it is. Nice thing about the Moroso pan too is the tip is magnetic, so it sticks to the pan. Also, any shards, if there are any shards, will get caught right on it, so you can clean them off. No shards in this thing, thankfully. So here's the exhaust system. There's basically, you know, the cats go back, they collect into this Y, and then go out the existing system into that 4-inch muffler. You know, it's rough, but it gets the car moving. We're going to end up redoing it. One, to clear this up. Two, to raise it up in the air. Right now it hangs really low and scrapes on everything, but we put it low because we didn't have the drive shaft, and we didn't know where the drive shaft was going to sit. We had a rough idea, so we just were cautious on the exhaust fitment, and we kind of knowing we're going to have to redo it anyway, so that's where that's at. But as you can see, some of the issues that you get, see how close these 4 lines are to the exhaust system. Now, if you know what you're looking at, you probably wouldn't care, but these all come out of the fuel tank. So there's 3 lines for the fuel tank. There's a fuel send, fuel return, and fuel vapor. And there's also the rear brake fluid. Goes back from the master cylinder to here. Now, like, those are not good things to have hot. Like, that's really bad stuff to have hot. So we had to address that. I don't know if a lot of people realize that this car was never designed to have an exhaust manifold or exhaust to go down both sides. As you can see, there's heat shielding on here because that's where the original cat wanted to be. This is where the original exhaust paths used to be. It was never designed to have an exhaust path right through here, and we changed that, of course. So fuel vapors for the emissions canister, fuel send and return. You know, fuel gets sent from the pump to the filter / pressure regulator, and if it's excess, it gets returned back to the tank. I don't think a lot of that's happening with this engine, but I don't think a lot of returns happening, but whatever. And the rear brake lines, like I mentioned, you don't want any of that to get hot. So what we actually did is we sent the fuel, we removed the fuel send. We undid that, moved the fuel send to the other side of the frame rail, which is right here. That's the frame rail right there. So now the fuel send is on this side of the frame rail. For the fuel return and the rear brake lines and the vapor, we wrapped them in a lot of heat wrap and then built a heat shield around this cat right here and further back. I wonder if we have a picture of it here, just to keep those cool, or to move heat away from those, let's say. I have a picture of it somewhere. This is just showing some of how tight it is up in this area. I mean, you can make it work, but it's tight. And you know, this car doesn't. There's 2 cats on each pipe, and then there's the 4-inch muffler, and there's nothing else. And it's surprising how kind of quiet the car is at idle. There's no drone, nothing like that. But under load, it sounds terrific. I mean, it sounds like a Camaro SS with an exhaust, and that's what it has essentially. But it's so cool to hear out of a 240. High R's, like 6,000 RPM, upshifts around there, sound real nice. There's part of the fuel send system. You know, not pretty, but there you go. This is the new clutch master. and line. It's got a quick bleeder on it too, which makes bleeding the clutch easy. That's one of the parts that comes with a fueled kit. Power steering. There's the original reservoir from Chevy fits here. It's too tall to clear the hood, so we put the 240SX power steering reservoir back in and hooked it up to the right lines. But we found, though, at high cornering rates, this canister, or this reservoir, leaks power steering out of the top, which is not good. So we have to figure out a better solution for that. But for the time being, it works. I may just tie a rag around it for the time being. Here's the temporary place for the, or the mock-up place for the GM fuel pressure regulator filter. Goes right there. Lines go in, lines go over. Pretty easy to install and set up. We have to use this because it's you have to use a non-adjustable fuel pressure regulator to be carb legal. That's what screwed up our one of the guys who used to work at the company who did this swap. Is he used an adjustable fuel pressure regulator. The carb system didn't like that, and that's what they kicked him out for. So he put one of these on, and it was fine after that. So he just did that from the get-go, and this is a Chevy filter. You get it from Chevy Performance Parts. Oil pressure sensors at the back of the engine, right here, and to use the race pack oil pressure gauge, we had to use a race pack oil pressure sensor because they all rely on the same network, and it took an adapter to get the pressure sensor to fit, because like one side's NPT and one side's metric, and those two don't talk well to each other. And so we just had to buy an adapter off Amazon to get that to work, and torqued right in, and that was fine. This is why you do it all. This sticker goes on the firewall, and once that's on, you're good. Once that's on, you're good. It was funny, when we were shooting the car on the road, we hire CHP, because we always hire CHP. We have to hire CHP when we have permits to shoot on the road. And you know, he was checking the car out, because most of the CHP guys we work with are really cool guys. They're all into cars. They love cars, which is really cool, and they're all good guys. Respect them a lot. And he's looking over this engine, and he's like, "Wow, this is really cool. This I can't believe this thing works. Where's your EO sticker?" And I walked over, pointed at that. He said, "Oh, okay, cool. You're good." And so when he was there, I got the idea, and I was like, you know, we want to make a fun car, but it's also important that this thing's street legal. What can you get this car on? Like, what in the vehicle? What does this car not pass in the vehicle code? And he looked at the car over, and he said, "Nothing. This thing is totally legit, totally fine." So we're totally CHP approved, which is great. It was really rewarding to hear that, to hear him say that. So Mike Kojima from Moto IQ, which is a great site if you're really into, really getting deep down into car tech. MotoIQ.com is a great site. I've been a fan of Mike Kojima since he was at Sport Compact Car. He's one of the reasons why I'm doing what I do now, and that I've been able to meet him, and he's seen this project, and he's offered to help on parts of it in the future. Is really, really cool, and I can't wait to get his help. We're basically going to enlist him to help with the suspension setup, and he knows a thing or two about setting up 240SXs and S13s. He's looking at this, and he's like, yeah, 1.3, 1.4G, no problem. Which is amazing, and actually kind of scary, considering the work. But he came over, and he looked at it, and he gave us a couple pointers on things, which is great. A lot of respect to him. Wow, there's a lot of things that I didn't talk about. We had to run a new accelerator pedal, because the E-Rod, it's an electronic throttle on the E-Rod engine. On the LS3, it's all E-throttle. There's no throttle cable. It's all electronic. So the E-Rod engine, one thing I didn't mention, it comes with a new gas pedal. We basically took out the 240SX one, took out the throttle cable, built a bracket that would keep the gas pedal at the same location of the 240SX pedal, and then installed that, plugged that in. That was fine. Now, what else? There's a ton of stuff that I feel like I'm missing out, and it feels like, you know, I've spent so much time in the garage working on this thing. Let me check my notes really quick. Check the longer story. We did do a new fuel pump, a Walbro, I think that's how you pronounce it, 255 LPH pump. That went in, no problem, and that's satisfying the engine's needs for fuel, no problem. There were just so many numerous little brackets we had to make to make stuff fit better. So many lines we had to, I mean, I ran to the parts store like 8 million times buying different hoses and lines to get things to fit, because there's always something. There's always a little thing that we never thought about. But, the transmission, there's a reverse. So on this transmission, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then reverses right and up. There's a solenoid that resists going over into reverse unless there's an electronic signal to release it. That electronic signal comes from either you wiring it up to a button or you building up a relay box that looks for specific parameters to be met in order to open the solenoid. The instructor's manual says you don't even have to wire it. It just requires extra effort to get it in reverse, and it does. It's not terrible, but it does, and it's totally fine. Like, it's totally great. This is the first night we drove it out of the shop right here, and Mark and I were giggling like idiots when we drove it out, because it was just like, I laughed like a maniac. I mean, the car is so freaking fast. The gearing is so short. It's a 408 final drive, and the gearbox is a really close ratio gearbox. When we did the quarter-mile test, I was going past the quarter in 5th gear. So we have some mechanical horsepower helping the car out, and it's really quick for the amount of torque. 430 horse, 424 pound-feet, and that's a lot for 2,800 pounds, you know, with short gearing, but it's so much fun. You have to do a 30-mile break-in, changing up engine load, never going near red line, all that stuff. And then after that, you change oil. Then you do another 500 miles of variable engine load and certain gear positions and all this and that. And then you change the oil again, and then you're good to go. And so I spent a week, Mark and I spent a week putting 500 miles on the thing. I drove it out to Palm Springs and back just to get it, get that thing broken in. And we found a lot of little things along the way, a lot of little miscellaneous leaks, a lot of little issues that we addressed and figured out and got right and tight before we sent it out to track use. And like, I can't stress how much fun this car is to drive. Like, it's just silly. There's Mark behind the wheel. And what's really cool about this dash, this IQ3 and this oil pressure sensor, is that it's hidden and tucked away, and it looks really clean. It looks so clean in place. That no one would suspect it from the outside looking in, but from the driver's seat, you look down and go, oh, okay. This was our first shakedown day at Fontana. We had a GT3 there too. It was interesting driving two back to back. So total, we got the car on the scales, and it gained 62 pounds, around 60 pounds from just the engine swap. 60 pounds it's gained for a V8 transmission. So the V8 itself is actually lighter than the 4-cylinder because the V8's all aluminum and the 4-cylinder's got an iron block. But we picked up weight in the transmission, and we know that because the weight balance didn't change. It's still 54-46 front to rear, and that hasn't changed since we bought the car. So we've just added, we've got 430 horsepower now with no major penalty in terms of weight, and that was really cool. We got the car aligned. I spent a day with Sam, who you might have seen in the other video, doing a corner balance. He's an actual Formula One engineer tech. He used to work on the Lotus F1 team, and he's got a ton of information. He wants to help out setting this car up too, and he knows what he's talking about. He knows a thing or two. But this car was so much fun around the figure eight. So much fun around the figure eight. Super short gearing, like I've mentioned 8 million times. Completely stock differential. So this car had the viscous limited slip differential, which is not a great type of diff. There's basically a clutch pack in there, and there's a fluid that sort of reacts to heat. And so once the tire starts spinning, in theory, the fluid heats up and starts locking the clutches, which in turn makes it a locking diff. The problem is after 130,000 miles and the fluid's going to break down, the clutches are going to break down, the clutch pack's going to break down. Also, it was never made to withstand 424 pound-feet of torque at all. That said, it works pretty damn well, I gotta say. Coming out of a corner, it's an oversteer car. There's a lot of oversteer. It's all on throttle, all the oversteer's on throttle. But it's really controllable. When the back end starts to come around, you can control it really easily with the steering. Steering is very direct, very light, very controllable. And even when you have half a wheel turn the other direction, if you're doing a half wheel counter steer, you can keep adding throttle, and the thing gets some really good forward acceleration, even when it's in a slide. It's got really, really good forward traction even when the tires are spinning, and it will spin those tires a lot. The rear end, so that diff, what happens in effect is when the tires start spinning, you can feel it sort of phase in and out. So you kind of always have to be mindful of it. But I actually found it kind of fun. Like, it's not what I would consider great, but it's playful. Like, it's got a really playful rear end. It's not an ideal driving characteristic, but it's fun. Like, it's really, you want to drift this car everywhere. The steering, I've seen a lot of complaints on the internet about how when you do this engine swap, the steering gets too light because of something to do with the power steering pump being oversized for the application. We didn't find that at all. The steering is, yeah, it's light, but there's a lot of feel in it, and the response is good. I haven't been able to cavitate the system at all or anything. Light steering isn't a bad thing. Vague steering is a bad thing, but light steering isn't a bad thing. Ferrari steering is very light. Ferrari F12 steering is very light. Ferrari 458 steering is very light. Those are all very good cars with very light steering, very quick, light steering. So if it works for them, it works for our Nissan. But yeah, this car is so much fun. There's some more miscellaneous things. This was during the oil change. I posted this on Instagram. That 180SX key, when I was in high school, college, I dragged home a front clip of a 180SX. I had an idea that I was going to do this SR20 swap into a 240, and then lugged the thing home, tore the thing apart, got way in over my head, realized it'd never be legal, and then sold it all off. But I always kept the key to remind myself to do it again, and that's the key below it is the 240 SS key. So it was really cool on like just a personal level, but getting this car to run and getting it to be as fun as it is. And this thing is like just dumb fun. Like I got out of that car grinning like an idiot, just saying this thing is dumb. This thing is so dumb because it's light, longish wheelbase, tons of torque, power slides for days, but really, really satisfying. Ultimately, you know, this car put down great numbers. The acceleration was 4.1 to 60. If you care, 12.3 to the quarter at 120.7 miles an hour. And that's me babying it out of the hole because we're still on stock axles and we don't want to shear them off or anything. And that trap speed that's an 11-second trap speed once we get new axles, and if we aren't afraid of destroying the axles, you know. That's a really good time for an 83 240SX, you know, with stock V8. You know, V8 hasn't been touched. You know, that's the stock output on on that exhaust system that you saw earlier. You know, and so the headroom on that is massive. But there's some other things we need to do before that. But you know, we've got great numbers out of the car. The figure 8 lap time was in the high 23, like 23.9, which is faster than a ton of really good sports cars, even with the problems like bad brake bias that we have to solve, with some mid-corner understeer that we have to fix. Even with those issues, this car put down fantastic numbers. But what's more important is that this car is just so much fun to drive. It's so much fun to drive. Like, it'll just put a smile on your face every single time you drive it, because it still has a 240SX balance, but with a ton of horsepower, a really good sound, and a great shifter. And you know, that's really when it matters when it comes down to these cars. So here's the race pack. I had the software on this computer. I'd love to show you guys how it all works, but unfortunately, I couldn't get the files on this computer on my other computer at the office. So whatever. So this is from when Randy lapped the car, and this kind of shows you what I'm talking about. So you know, we're looking at the smooth green line speed. I think the jiggly green line is lateral acceleration, maybe? No, because I wouldn't have that dump there. Maybe it's lateral acceleration. No, because yeah, that is lateral acceleration because there's a turn right there. Okay, and then the blue line, I believe, is oil pressure, or is it the yellow line is oil pressure? Either way, this is what I'm talking about when I'm talking about logging all the components of the car. You can compare various different parts off the car's sensors to where it's at and what it's doing, and it gives you a very clear indication of you know, how the car's performing. It also lets you analyze the driver. I could tell Randy like, hey, you're shifting 500 RPM too soon. You know, what's up with that? You know, or I could be like, you know, you're carrying it a gear too high because this is going to log all that. You can see how the animosity between an engineering team and a racing driver can build real quick when the data doesn't lie. But it's pretty funny to see that stuff. Randy did a 125.7, I believe, at streets, which is not bad for the car's first outing on the track. The car can go a ton faster. Basically what happened is the brake bias on the car isn't good. We have a 300ZX master cylinder in there right now, but the front end's locking up too quick, and there's some braking performance that's still on the table right now that we have to find. It's non-ABS, and non-ABS is always going to be a challenge when talking about brake bias, because we're talking about braking because there's always going to be that worry about locking up the tires in a big braking zone. So in terms of driver trust, that's always going to be an issue that we're going to have, unless there are some aftermarket ABS setups that we haven't considered. And then there's some mid-corner understeer that we have to tune out. We also have to tune the dampers a bit more. The dampers were on the recommended KW settings, which I think is like 5 and 5 for rebound and bound and rebound. So we have to play with those a little bit because you see the car sort of bouncing around on the front end a little bit. So we have to tune those dampers up, and then take some of that understeer out of the mid-corner, playing with the alignment, playing with the camber to get that out. And then once we get that set up, this thing is going to be in the high 123s. We imagine at streets. It's totally possible to do. Like that's not an unrealistic goal. Like I don't like unrealistic goals. That's a realistic goal is high 123s. So with new axles, with the right tuning, it shouldn't be hard to do. We also have to address cooling. Basically, like what's happening, in my opinion, is there's a lot of air going into that radiator, but the air is not going anywhere once it's in that engine bay. So the engine bay gets real hot. So we're closely monitoring temps, and this is only at track performance. When you're going real fast, that's when the temp starts climbing up. So we're probably going to end up venting the hood, hopefully to promote some airflow through the engine and hopefully keep temps down, because it's pretty scary. LS engines are bulletproof unless they get too hot, like any engine. So that's kind of for the future. And there it is at the track, looking good. Hatchbacks are great. I posted this on Instagram too because you know there's our emergency 240SX supply box. There's all the tools and test equipment and jack and cones and stuff that we use to test cars, and it all fits in the hatch of the 240. So there's a track day and a trunk right there, which is great. And that's kind of it. We did a lot of this drifting, and I was real happy, as you can see looking at that. That's going to wrap up the LS build on the 240 SS. This was a really cool thing to do. It took a lot of time and a lot of effort, but once we got that car out of the shop, it was a really satisfying thing to drive. It was a ton of fun, and I hope you guys really enjoy what we did with it, and I'm hoping to do a lot more with it soon. If you got any questions, let me know. Take care.